Let me present Jim Mickle, the director. Thanks for overgiving. Really quickly, I think Kara Jensko is here. Is she here?
She had to go to the airport.
Oh, our location manager was here. We do have a member of the crew here. Ken Holmes, is he here? Yeah, our burglar from the beginning of the film is here. Our real burglar. Hi. Well, thank you all for sticking around. It's great to see such a great turnout. Any questions about the movie? Raise them high.
So I really enjoyed the film.
Thank you.
And I have a question about game characters. At the beginning and the middle of the film, he was really it's a typical ordinary man. He's uncomfortable with people's attentions, but suddenly the character becomes Dexter. So I was curious about why he did this injustice.
Yeah. It's a lot of reasons, and hopefully we leave some to apply to yourself personally as you watch. I like to think of it as a coming of age film of a man who is a man, and a lot has to do with a guy who's never really been tested, and I think there's some interesting things in the story and the character about, contemporary guys faced with this sort of old-fashioned sense of morality that Sam and Don bring to the story. And what that means for contemporary men who are no longer meant to forage and hunt, the way we were used to. So it's a little bit of a, weird fantasy, twisted, alternate, reality, and how far we ourselves would go if we were pushed to this, I used to describe it as a guy who all of a sudden steps into a 1970s tough guy film. All of a sudden he's got Lee Marvin and Charles Bronson in his life, and he's trying to see if he can exist in that same world with those guys.
For me, the movie was about fathers and sons. A father with a young son that he's proud of but needs to reprimand once in a while. A father with an older son that he, is not sure how he's going to reprimand him. The Korean veteran who was saved, and Sam becomes his father. So I thought it was about fathers and sons, and I really loved that. And I love the mellowing and the comedy, so it relieved the tension, so that I was able to get right back into the tension. My one problem and question would be why sort of the mass killings? Because for me it muddied the confrontation that the father had the final solution with the son.
Right.
Because that it was almost an anticlimax for me when the father had to kill his son.
Right.
I would rather have had that. Just those two the whole time.
Yeah. I think anytime you're going to take on something with as many shifts and as many different characters, as many different character arcs. What starts off as one guy's story, all of a sudden becomes three guys' stories. I think you're going to hit stuff that doesn't quite connect with everyone. That for me is the moment when Michael comes of age. And that moment, he's literally ejaculating at the ceiling, if you want to look at it that far, So for me, that was a choice to keep it centered to Michael's story, and to make sure that in all of the different threads that come together, that we don't muddy up the one initial thread that comes through there. But I wanted this to end on that bang. I had read, based on a book. When I read this book, I just sat there in bed and I just shook when I read that last ending. I'm like, and I wanted to recreate that here. But thank you for pointing the father and son thing, because it is I also described it early on as a love story about fathers and sons.
Hey man.
Hey.
What's up? It's good to see you finally got to make
I've been talking to this guy about this movie for 4 years and never figured I'd actually make it.
Well, but first I'd like to acknowledge that it's from an insanely good book by a gentleman named Joe Lansdale.
Yes.
I've always wanted you to make the Happen Leonard novels as well.
Yeah.
But I'm just going to ask you a nerdy question now and not try to be too clever. Dude, I mean, we've kind of known each other for a while. I met you back when you did Stakeland in Austin. Now you're working with people like Don Johnson, dude.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool. So what's different now? I mean, what's different for you now? What's your time like? What's the getting funding like? I mean, generally, has life become easier?
Crazy, I mean, honestly, being here last year with We Are What We Are, I played the Midnight category here at Sundance. Being here with that film, I think, we had been, so everyone knows this film, we adapted this 7 years ago, and it's been, we had made a horror film, and I think people want us to keep making horror films, which I would love to do. But I think the commercial side of it was people wanted us to do the cheap horror film that they could make a cute box out of and sell at DVD stores, And all of a sudden we wanted to do something that was like a thriller and a noir and a western, and all the things that I loved about it, the fact that you couldn't categorize it, was all the things that made people turn their nose up at it and not want to touch it. So I think it was being at Sundance here last year with a film that also was a horror film, but it was also family melodrama and also had that kind of stuff. I think that finally gave us the kick in the pants that it needed to go. But the actors is, it's
Sam Shepard, man, like whoa.
And Sam Shepard, yeah. I mean, it's one thing when you're working with people like about that caliber. It's a little easier to sort of push them into things, and it's a lot harder to do that with these guys. But that I think actually makes it good for me. It's strong for me because it's not, Sam, for instance, there's a lot of stuff where he was like, I'm not going to do that because I don't, my character doesn't feel that, and sometimes you just go like, hey, just fucking do it, we need to shoot, You can't do that. So, but it winds up being better because you wind up getting something much more true out of him, and he knows it's going to work. And the same thing for Don. There's a lot of times it was cool as Don would come in and say, there's a lot of stuff in the script here, some of it's going to be great, some of it's not going to work, and we have no idea what it's going to be, so I'm going to give you a million other things in the meantime, and I'll trust you guys to, in the edit room, pick the stuff that works the best and find the right balance. So it's cool. It's great to work with people that, it was funny during the whole shootout at the end, Don would constantly be, to the point of annoying at times, but in the right way, be like, I've done one or two of these shootout things, like, I'll tell you what you're going to want. And in terms of time, I don't know, because we finished this last week, so it's literally like, it's somewhat sleeping a little bit, but the press now and all this kind of stuff has been just as much, so we'll see next week what time is working.
How did you do the casting? How did you get all these actors?
It was really hard. It was really, 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 really hard, because again, I think coming from the horror thing, the real budget horror thing, I think a lot of agents stop at the door, they don't really, and they'll read it and say, I really like it, but there's all these reasons why they don't want to do it, so Michael we had heard while we were making We Are, we had heard that Michael had read and liked the script, and it was like a great, for one reason or another, other things fell apart, and it seemed like we were probably never going to make the movie. So when I was here last year, I had introduced We Are, and I thought, you know what, Cold, I don't think we're ever going to make it for some reason. And then randomly, at a party at Park City, probably like a year ago today, saw Michael at a corner of the party, and Nick D'Amici, the guy who plays Price, the detective, who also wrote the script, came over at some point, tapped me on my shoulder and said, someone wants to talk to you. I turned around, it was Michael, and I was like, I love that script. I'm going to be done next year this summer. At that point, they didn't know, and I'd love to do it after that. So finally, during the course of the spring, the money came together, and then once we had Michael, then all of a sudden people started returning phone calls, and so Sam, who we had offered it to 6 years ago, and who said, I'm going to read it on a fishing trip with my son this weekend, and then never heard back from for 3 months. All of a sudden, he actually read it and liked it, and same thing with Don, and then it was just a spiral.
It's really refreshing to see all those really, really bold choices. And I just wonder your process, was that something, with your music selection, for example, did you go in after you had the script and in the shooting phase, you knew what tracks you were going to lay down? Or this process, did it obviously there is some molding that happens in the editing phase, but how different of a movie is it than you envisioned?
It changed a lot. It was really a cool process at how much it evolved, because I think when I read it, I had one idea, and there was for instance, the end of the movie, the whole shootout, I always wanted to do that in one long, Children of Men style take, where you just go in the house and it's 7 minutes of following. And then, you know, it never would have happened, and Sam was terrified we were going to do it, because I actually said that in the script. But in a way, we actually did that in Stake we did a scene just like that. And there's a couple other things, originally when I read the book, I thought, oh, I want to do this, and we wound up getting it out of our system with the other movies in a way. And so then it became this sort of weird thing that by the time the movie came up, I was like, you know, but we spent 7 years with this, the project has changed so much, you know, and we've grown up as storytellers and filmmakers, and you know, and all of a sudden the crew and stuff, and we just made this very precise, very locked off, very restrained, underplayed horror film, and so then it was like, let's do the exact opposite. So by the time we shot it, I think it was a much different. Had we shot the movie 7 years ago after I read the book, it would have been completely different. I think it would have been a lot more straightforward. I think we probably would have. I wouldn't have been as comfortable trying to go as far with the humor. Wouldn't have gone as far probably with the 80s thing, and a lot of the sort of the John Carpenter nods, you know, probably wouldn't have been comfortable to go as far with that stuff. So in a way it was freeing to come off of a movie that had just been celebrated for pushing some boundaries, and it kind of gave us, I think, a kick in the pants to say, let's try something else. So in terms of the editing, it's by far the most it's changed in the edit room. The first cut is about 2.5 hours long. There's a lot of subplots that got pulled out, and really good material. We were faced for a while with a really long film that everything, I think, was working, but it was just too much of it, so we had to sort of pick and choose our battles. And music evolved during the course of it, you know. I was watching a lot of these Blu-ray John Carpenter re-released Blu-ray films and sort of falling in love with that music sound as we were finishing the film up, and so I think that worked its way in pretty late in the game. And then Linda Moran, our producer, who's here, big round of applause for Linda. Linda really helped this movie together entirely. Linda really, because we were so tight on time, it was Linda who went through and found a lot of these songs, a lot of the 80s songs, and you know, stuff that was hard to spend the time to track down. It was really Linda that found a lot of that stuff. So it evolved up until literally, you know, a couple weeks ago. Any other? Yeah.
I read the book years ago, and that was an amazing execution. But my question is, who's the priest at the cemetery?
That's Joe Lansdale. Yeah. Joe Lansdale, the author, who's in Park City, who just got in, and he's going to be at the Echo screening tomorrow night with his family. Yeah, he played the priest. Yes, in the red shirt.
Who was in the grave?
This guy. Just a nobody, you know, a guy who walked in and literally just walked into the wrong house.
Along those lines, I was wondering why you didn't follow up on that aspect of the storyline, like crooked cops, setting up the ex-con and all that.
Yeah. We did in early stuff, you know, that was part of what I was saying, it was a long film, we had to cut some stuff out. You know, I was always a big proponent of it's got to be in there, and we had an ending where when he comes home, Price had actually left the real wanted poster for the real burglar, and you see him, and it just says, like, just in case you care, and Michael basically burns it and drops it in the sink, like, I don't give, you know, none of this matters, you know, this whole movie starts off wanting to find out what this is, and it becomes this whole other thing, you know, thematically. And people really didn't like it, you know, it was really weird. The thing that we cut the most of was the stuff that I thought like that people would really want to know, and the feedback that we consistently got was like, I don't care, you know, I don't care. I know what this means inherently. I think most people get that sense of like, it starts off as, well, you know what this guy is, and then by the end of it, it's become so much more than that, you know, to boil it down to one idea of what it was feels insignificant in a way. And I think it took away from the overall sense of like, he's become a man in a way. So it's, you know, one of the things that gets lost in the thinning process. Yeah, the way back.
So you mentioned that he wasn't done with Dexter until like the late spring.
Yeah.
When did you guys end up start shooting, and how long were you actually on set for?
So we shot for 5 weeks. I think we started last day of July, maybe. So we shot all through August, but he only had like 3 or 4 days off in between. I think he finished like the weekend before. It was crazy how much and then he moved too. He had bought a house, I think, during the series. So as soon as he wrapped, he had to go to jury duty, which he'd been putting off for like 8 years. He had to move his house and then he had to completely dump the character Dexter and then get into this completely new character. And I think in a way, I didn't think it was going to work, and I think in a way it was like a cathartic thing for him that he was able to leave that, go to this tiny town. We shot in upstate New York, not in Texas. Go to this tiny town in upstate New York, grow a shitty mustache. And he actually had the guys from Dexter, if you're a Dexter fan, the last episode where he's got the beard, the guys that made the beard for him, sorry, spoiler alert, at the very end. They also made him this mullet, and saved that mullet hairpiece, and he came and said, I don't have enough time to grow one, so, but I still want to have one. So it was a cool process that literally, I think he jumped from one to the other and didn't even have time to get rid of that, and it was kind of cool to see a guy go through that. Any others?
I come from an advertising world, and I love not knowing much about the film.
Yeah.
I read just a quick description.
Yeah.
It's about a guy who kills a guy, and then his dad comes after him. So I thought the whole movie was going to be about that.
Yeah.
And I loved not knowing about the dirty cops, and it wasn't even his son. And as you start to advertise the film, online and in the trailers, is the audience going to know what they're doing?
Yeah, I don't know, to be honest, I don't know. And that'll be one of the challenges, I think, of releasing the film is making sure that people, I don't know, because to me what I like is I feel like so often I go into a movie and 5 minutes in I feel like I know exactly what it is. And I think that's become, especially as mainstream and in Hollywood, it's become a comforting thing, let people know exactly what they're going to get in 5 minutes and make sure that you don't break that mold. And what I loved about the story reading the book was I had the same reaction. I just started reading it and thinking, okay, cool, I'd watch this cat and mouse Cape Fear thing for 2 hours, it'd be great, And then all of a sudden when it becomes something else and I didn't expect it, I stopped being a sort of cynical viewer and I started to sit back and say, I'll just enjoy the ride, So I think when it comes time to releasing it and doing all that, I hope whoever does, I think will stay on them a lot to make sure that they don't give things away and don't,
I love not knowing that Ben was going to be
Yeah. I think what's so far and seeing just some press stuff so far is that it's been, it starts off as this and then I'm not going to tell you where it goes, but after that you'll never guess. And I think if we can keep that narrative, so everybody here don't tell anyone. It's up to you. Yeah. One last question, in the corner.
So you've spoken a bit about the character development of Mike Mickle's character, and I think that the tone of the film really reflects that development. But I'm just curious about why it is that you decided then to add more humour towards the end. Was that purely to alleviate some of the violent scenes, or do you feel that it fits in with that tone and that character development as well?
A lot of it is, a lot of that comes from the book. A lot of that is Don and the character Jim Bob. You sort of can't put him in a scene that he sees as so charming and brings that to it. And I think that was, to me, that was part of the fun, was the tonal shifts. I think that's exciting to me when something kind of shifts and it catches you on your toes. And so that was an element of the book that I did want to keep. At the same time, I think there is a lot of humor in the beginning, but I think it's a different type. It's a little bit more of like observational. We kept describing him as a guy who's just having the worst day of his life. Michael described it as a guy who decided to grow a mustache a week ago. So I think there's elements to humor early on, and I think what's kind of fun about watching it with an audience is like, as the audience, as you start to realize that you can laugh at some things, it's there early on, and it starts to weave itself in, and it's an interesting process to see, like a back and forth with the film and an audience of when they get the permission, I guess. And obviously once Don comes, he brings it pretty hardcore. Hopefully it's not too jarring of a shift, but it is a shift that we wanted to have. Cool, awesome, thank you, everybody.